in any act of architecture, in any act of urban planning, I think we should be only pushed by this idea of generosity.
Hi, my name is India Block and I'm the US editor for Dezeen. Welcome to a very special bonus episode of Face to Face, our podcast series where we sit down with the biggest names in architecture and design and find out who they are and what they do. The 2021 Pritzker Prize was recently given to the French architecture firm Lacaton Vassal. For the occasion, we've dug into our archives to find this interview I did with one half of the practice, Jean-Philippe Vassal, before he gave the annual architecture lecture at the Royal Academy in 2019. At the time, Lacaton and Vassal had just won the Mies van der Rohe Award for their project 530 Dwellings, which is in Bordeaux. So the interview touches on key aspects of this project, as well as many of the reasons why the practice was awarded the Pritzker Prize. I hope you enjoy this pop-up episode of Face to Face with Jean-Philippe Vassal. First off, would you mind telling us in your own words what it is that your practice does?
We are architects in Paris since now nearly 20 years. Before in Bordeaux, we make the School of Architecture in Bordeaux. We try to understand what is an architect today, what's for, what are the main objectives that we could have as an architect dealing with this question of today about quality of life, comfort, pleasure, freedom, economy, ecology, sustainability, and are we positive and optimist towards the complexity of the city, complexity and richness also of the cities, and how we can be inventive in any situation.
And for 530 Dwellings, you approached a 1960s housing block and renovated it. How do you begin with a project of that scale?
In fact, there is no scale. Scale, I think, doesn't exist. Scale only exists if you stay in your office and if you try to draw the building or the city on your paper. But as soon as you go to the place, as soon as you knock to the door and talk with the people that are in the building, there is no more scale. Because in fact you are a family and you talk with them, you listen to them. 530 flats, it is 530 times one flat. And if we try to do our best for this flat, and if we repeat that 530 times, after that the block is finished. It is that if we do this maximum for each flat, if we work on giving additional spaces like winter gardens, balconies, etc., better electric system, new elevators, taking care of all of that, then when it will be finished, the well-being will look different, just by sort of consequence of all this work from the inside. It's valid for 530, it is valid for 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. For the whole city, you can practice like that, starting from the smallest piece and step by step, making all of them. So we really believe in this kind of urban planning, which is no more the master plan, but which is this very precise intervention, step by step, case by case, taking care of each situation, taking care of people, taking care of buildings, taking care of trees, taking care of rose trees on the balconies, and trying with these very precise, very delicate interventions to be sustainable, to be ecologic, to be economic, and to be ambitious.
And is that where you started then, with the individual people living in the flats? Did you go and speak to them first before you'd even come up with a design? Or
some people, sometimes they call you to say, what do we do with this building? We perhaps imagine that we could demolish it, but people don't want. But you see, it's, during the 10 last years, we do nothing for that building. Many problems. Okay, so we go, and the first thing it is to see, to listen, to understand what are the questions, what are the problems, what is missing, what is What is the problem? And very often the problems are not so important as people say. People, most of the time, they stay very far away. They never come to see and to talk directly with the people. So when you start talking and discussing with the people, then you step by step start to understand what could be possible.
And this idea of adapting rather than demolishing, obviously that is a more environmentally friendly method, but many architects would perhaps prefer just to knock it down and to start with a blank canvas. Mm-hmm. Do you think it provides a different challenge, or is it challenging to the architect to kind of let go perhaps of that ego of getting an entirely new building from scratch and instead working with the work of an architect that has come before perhaps 30, 50 years previously?
I think probably if I was an architect during the 60s or the 50s, I would not have done these huge blocks in the periphery or around the cities. But in fact, they are here now. And people during 20, 30, 40 years, they live there. And we know that it's difficult to find new flats. It's actually probably around London, but around Paris, you have more than 200,000 families searching for affordable flat, and they cannot find it. So what it means to start by demolishing some buildings. So it's totally crazy situation. So instead of that, we try to see how we could have another attitude, and thinking that if there is something existing, and if you add 50% of that thing, you will have 1.5 instead of, if you demolish and you rebuild, at the end you have only 1. And in fact you spend much more by demolishing and rebuilding than by addition. So I think it's a new practice. It's a new practice that for me, it's for architects, because we cannot have an overview, we cannot have a sort of urban overview approach, which could be the one of the urbanist. We start from the problems. We start from very small details, and then we see how we can solve them. And it's another approach. I hope it will come like that more and more. I hope it will be like that. But there is a lot of possibilities by this method of addition, approaching the situation instead of coming back to the tabula rasa. It's very difficult to imagine that today every city is talking about sustainability, about ecology, about economy, about affordability. So if the only point it is to do it. And to do it, it is necessary to do it differently.
And do you find that you get a lot of support with that in your work? I'm thinking that this is now the second year in a row that the Mies Award has gone to the kind of project where a 60s housing block has been renovated. Is that something you found in Europe? Is that a general feeling that people are on board with this more sustainable, perhaps less aesthetic method? I'm thinking in particular because here in the UK, our attitude has been very much to either demolish a lot of our housing stock from that era, or in the incredibly tragic case of Grenfell Tower, millions of pounds was spent on a refurbishment that in fact made it an incredibly dangerous place to live. And we now have hundreds of buildings across the country here that are covered in dangerous cladding. So what, I suppose, can architects here learn from that, or is it some sort of general attitude change that you think is yet to come?
I think in France, in Netherlands, just to talk about these two last prize of Mies van der Rohe, there has been a lot of demolition. Also like in US, like in England, I remember Robin Hood's gardens, and I think it's a mistake. And I think, I hope that more and more we will do differently. But it has to be done with generosity and not in the minimum way. When we place some foam on the facade for insulation and just for insulation, it doesn't give any pleasure for the people. So we say, no, it's not foam that we have to give to an extension of the building. We have to create winter gardens like gardens at every levels that are as efficient as another insulation, but also that create new living spaces, new spaces where people can meet, make some gardening, be more free than in their former flat. We cannot just apply some technological insulation systems. It's important to think about space and how the space can be improved, qualified, in order to give more pleasure. The only condition for sustainability of building, it is a pleasure that you can give to the families. We had a lot of these very bad examples of refurbishment in France. Most of the buildings that were built in the 60s and that have been refurbished in the 80s, it is the ones that are in the poor situation, more in the most poorest situation today, even more than the ones that have never been refurbished. So it means at one moment we cannot just do the minimum. We have to really to think of how to do the maximum. This generosity is absolutely essential. In any act of architecture, in any act of urban planning, I think we should be only pushed by this idea of generosity.
And how do you think a young architect today could perhaps get in touch with that idea of generosity over technical proficiency or coming at a project to try and solve it purely by brain power? It sounds like it's a more sympathetic or that kind of soft skill of empathy that you're asking from architects. Is that something that is taught enough in schools? Is that something that it's on architects themselves to find?
No, it's not enough actually. In the schools, most of the time we learn about technical details, depths of insulation, if there is triple glass or double glass, if there is some thermal bridge between inside and outside. I think we should think first about the quality and the beauty of space and the freedom that we can try to bring to inhabitants. It's a main point. Today, the apartments are smaller and smaller, and they are more and more expensive. And I think if we come back to very simple things, to build in a very simple way, working with what is already there, just adding some elements, thinking that the most important materials are the light, the air, the sun, the life, and that is already a lot with which the architect can do. I think it would be better, much better. And I think the architect have the sensibility to understand that. But as architect, we have not to just to apply the materials and the techniques and the technology that the business of material products wants to sell. We have also to try to employ some materials that are still free: light, air, sun, life.
And how much power do architects have in the negotiation with developers when it comes to affordable housing? I mean, I can't imagine there are many architects that want to build tiny flats, unless they think perhaps that it's a technical challenge. But is there space for architects to push back? Was the client on the 530 dwellings project on board with this level of generosity?
We have to change the mind of the developers. We don't have to change in function of the developers. We have to change the mind of the developers, because in fact it is possible to make much better flats, much more simple and much more affordable. So at one moment the question is, do they really want to make this kind of flats, or they just want to stay in the market, in what they have done before, and what in fact creates this kind of financial product that defines the flats today in the cities. Most of the time we have been confronted with these questions, If you make a flat that it is 2 or 3 times bigger than the standard flat, and even if you make it at the same cost as the flat that it is 2 or 3 times smaller, or I can rent it, or I can sell it 2 or 3 times more. No, there is no reason. It makes sense to sell or rent a flat in function of its cost, and not in function of a sort of speculative cost defined by the cities or by the markets. So we really believe in that situation, and each time we have done like that, it has been done like that. It's not because you have double space for your flat. If it costs the same as a standard flat, there is no reason to rent it 2 times the cost. So it means it comes back to very simple things. When you make simply a contract with your architect for your own house, you pay the in function of the cost of construction and in the function of the intelligence of the architect to define the most affordable and generous space as he can.
And this seems to me like a principle that would also apply to sustainability in a project, that if you want to make a more environmentally friendly building or adapt an existing building to be more sustainable, you need to slow down at the beginning. You need to take this time. You need to think of a solution that will work in the long term rather than rushing towards something or kind of assuming it's just something you can tack on by sticking a couple of solar panels. What is your approach to sustainability in your practice?
I really believe the question of economy is very, very important. And in a way, this economy is also linked with the ecology and also with the sustainability. So if we talk about keeping buildings instead of demolishing them, it's the first step of the sustainability to make sustainable what already exists. Then you can see what you can add, because there is something missing or there is something not working so well. So just try to repair and just try to add what is missing. So it is just doing what is necessary and not too much. But even by that, you will give much more pleasure and much more capacity and much more freedom than in redoing or rebuilding after demolition. So using less materials as possible by keeping in account what is already there, working with natural and free elements like the air, the light and the sun. So all of this for me is part of the sustainability and the ecology, coming back with simple things in a natural way and not following even this kind of green ecologic business.
And could you unpack for me this idea of freedom in your work? Do you want people to feel free when they live inside a space that you've designed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it starts from the freedom that each one can have in its own individual flat, and then it continues with the sort of collective freedom. So places where you can meet, you can have meetings, you can make workshops, etc. But at the starting point, it is, yes, the free space, which it means that you have, it's a sort of the idea of the house in the countryside, but applied to the cities. How it is possible inside the city to have enough space, to have perhaps a winter garden and to have a balcony. So this kind of layers that give you this approach from inside to the outside. And this is very important. So there is a part which is free because it is not so well defined. You can say a flat, it is 1 or 2 bedrooms plus a living room plus a bathroom plus a kitchen, and you can make spaces for that. But perhaps there is an extra space, which is for something that you cannot define as a function, which is freedom. And this additional space, suddenly, it gives more capacity, more fluidity, more possibility to invite some people, more possibility to start gardening, more possibility to go in the sun or in the shadow or in other kind of climates. So all of these spaces, they offer new possibilities of choice for the inhabitants. And I am really confident with the inhabitants in their capacity of using these spaces by being creative, inventive. I don't know how, because it's their life, it's not mine. But most of the time I see in the flats that we have done that we are incredibly surprised by the inventivity and the creativity of the inhabitants.
And this idea of the community, of engaging with the people that will be using the space, how can you make it so that community is not just this meaningless buzzword? How do you allow that to inform your ideas as an architect? Do you have to step back at some point and listen to the people rather than just projecting what you think would improve their lives?
Sometimes you don't know the people for whom you will build. When you don't know the people for whom you will build, you have to imagine the situations where these people will have the maximum of possibilities of choice. It means that you can do more with more space than with less space. You have a better contact with the outside when it is each time fully transparent than when it is behind very small windows, because you always are able to filter, to opacify or to open when it is transparent than when it is definitively behind a window that you cannot change. So trying to extend the possibilities of choice of each inhabitant is important. So most of the time for dwellings and flats, we have worked for this individual space. Very often people don't really give you the possibility to work on the collective question. But the first step it is to do it for the individual space, and after to be confident also in the how people will invite each other, but also how it would be possible to have some additional spaces, public space, collective spaces. We have worked a little more on this question on other programs like School of Architecture in Nantes or the Palais de Tokyo in Paris. So this capacity also of space to provide contact, meetings, relationships. And for these reasons also the space has to be free. Precisely because there is this extra space that it is in addition of the functional space.
And for a public space to be truly public, does that mean that it can't be a privately owned public space? How do you create a public space that truly functions for the people who are using it?
But for example, I was talking about Palais de Tokyo. Palais de Tokyo is a public space. So what is important? It is open from 12 to midnight. It is important that we should not have to make the queue outside. And to enter in the building, it should be important to have this kind of visibility. So public space is working with this question of vision. If you are in a place where you see somebody that himself is looking at somebody else, looking to somebody else, perhaps looking at an art piece, you have a system of relation towards you, to the other, and the other, and the other. And in a way, you are related to the art piece that the last one is looking at. So it is this kind of system and relation that is important. So it's also by taking away the walls. We really don't like to make walls, to build walls, and we build less walls as possible. So most of the time, each time the space is contained by a very simple system of frame, columns, floors, that's all. And after that, we just have perhaps some filters, some partitions, but less walls as possible. These last 20 years, the society has built more and more walls, even sometimes between the countries, at the frontier, at the borders. And we are in a society that is more and more defensive. We don't like that. We like when the society is open. Perhaps it is optimist or naive, but we really think that when we have the generosity, when we have enough space, affordable space, there is really a possibility to stay open and to keep open and not to fight against the elements.
Do you think architects have a moral responsibility then to reject walls, reject borders, reject the hostile architecture?
I think in our case, we try to do that. This possibility of sliding elements for us is really nice, very delicate. I always remember this traditional villa in Japan, which is Villa Katsura, only working with sliding elements, which means that there is a sort of fluidity of space between one space that can become two, or that can become one again, or that can open to the outside or inside. It's very simple gestures of architecture. The case study house program in US in the 50s, that was a social housing program, and that has at this time probably built the most beautiful houses and villa of the West Coast in a very, very affordable system.
And these systems, are they sustainable? How do you make it sustainable? So these beautiful sliding doors, for example, are they easy to replace? If something breaks or goes wrong, is it pretty easy just to get one? You don't need to specially manufacture it?
No, it's very standard projects that are... what is important, it is to find the efficiency in the system. After that, what is important, it is as architect to work with them and to place them at the right place in the right way.
And with 530 dwellings, what were the ways that most surprised you that people used their winter gardens? Were there any particularly interesting or amusing ways that people had responded to this freedom that you'd given them?
It was nice because when the jury, we had a report of some people of the jury of Mies van der Rohe Award, and they were able to go and see some inhabitants in some flats. And one of the member of the jury says, I asked the inhabitant, what do you think of, what could you say about your flat? And he just answers, for me, it's a gift. That's nice, no?
It's a lovely gift. Is this something that you think another housing project somewhere could use, or is this a just bespoke for this particular development, or do you think it has the possibility to be used in other places or in other countries?
Sure, everywhere, but it is it's already done. In fact, not only by architects. You have these strange what they call tube flats in Vietnam, where people they have started to extend also by themselves. I think in Tbilisi also, I think there is a place where they have started to extend these huge blocks. So it's a sort of, in a way, it's a sort of natural feeling that inhabitants should have to go further than their windows, to go in the air, to dream, to start flying like birds. And if we can help them, it's okay. We can everywhere.
Great. Thank you so much, Jean-Philippe, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
This podcast was produced by our in-house creative team, Dezeen Studio, with music by Yuri Suzuki from Pentagram. Check out our past episodes of Face to Face, which feature conversations with designers and architects such as Ez Devlin, David Chipperfield, Thomas Heatherwick, Tom Dixon, and John Pawson. Go to dezeen.com/podcasts to learn more. And remember to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts.